Now let's bring in George Tsilis, senior markets correspondent. George, we're talking semiconductors this week, and I looked at, we talked about the big names, Intel, AMD earlier. I kind of wanted to hit on Qualcomm because it's really underperforming this week and this year, down 3% on the year. And now this story comes out about Apple potentially losing some market share in China due to the bans. What's the take here on Qualcomm? Because it's not only that story, it's been underperforming all year before this.
It has. Look, if you look at it, at least in the last year, it's down about 17%. It's not performing well at all. I mean, it's trading around two-year lows. About 2 years ago, it was trading around $180. And the funny thing is this is actually an essential company when it comes down to smartphone devices. Everyone's talking about Apple as of recent. When it comes to the semiconductors, everyone was talking about NVIDIA. But Qualcomm's CDMA technologies are really the backbone for smartphones. When it comes down to the market share, they have about 30% of global smartphones use their technologies. And one of the compelling technologies associated with Qualcomm is that they actually have what are called system-on-a-chip technologies, which combine both communications semiconductors alongside computing. And that's very unique to Qualcomm. Now, a couple of challenges you got to keep in mind with Qualcomm is they were growing their expansion base in the mobile sector, including things like tablets and smartphones. But at the same time, they've got exposure to Apple with about 20% of their revenues based on their broadband modems, which Apple uses. The other thing is you've got to think about Huawei and some of the other competitive challenges. Now, there may be some export restraints on Qualcomm's 4 and 5G chipsets to Huawei based upon some of the geopolitical risks we're facing. We know Apple's facing some challenges, while at the same time, the CPU markets have been challenged in the last year. So you got a lot of things going against Qualcomm from an earnings and revenue standpoint. And if you actually look at the quarterly report that they published back on in the early August, I mean, sales were down about 30% year over year. Earnings were down 30%, where sales were down 23%. They actually missed on the estimates. So this is really an interesting situation where value investors would say, yeah, it looks very compelling now, considering Qualcomm's drought in price. The earnings estimates have actually declined significantly for both earnings and sales. But at the same time, there are some exogenous challenges that Qualcomm is facing. Again, concentration risk with Apple, geopolitical risk, and competition, because it's not just Huawei. ARM Holdings is another competitor now in the system-on-a-chip technologies, primarily for handset, mobile devices, and of course, tablets and so forth.
George, this whole sector, Qualcomm, ASML, Taiwan Semi, Broadcom, they all sold off on this news that you just mentioned about the Huawei phone and the fact that some of those chips, they think, are skirting U.S. sanctions, right? So what can be done? Is there any remedy to this, or is this just hey, you got us on this one, we'll get you on the next one?
Well, that's a good question. I can't say from an international trade standpoint or a sanctions standpoint what's going on with Qualcomm, but I will say this. I think if you look at the price action in the chart, it looks rather compelling, coming to some 3-year levels on the chart. The other thing is you've got some tensions, not just with competition from Huawei, ARM Holdings, concentration in Apple, but you also have to deal with the U.S. government export restraints on selling their technologies to Huawei and other Chinese manufacturers. So there's a lot of things going against Qualcomm, I will say. Yeah. But so is the chart. The chart's actually demonstrated quite a bit of weakness. And from a valuation standpoint, it's trading around 13 times earnings, where historically it's around 17 times. So this is an interesting situation for Qualcomm, which in the backdrop is actually a very important company, but it does get overshadowed for some of the majors like Apple and NVIDIA.
Yeah, what I read, China, including Hong Kong, 2/3 of Qualcomm's revenue at this point. So geopolitical tensions definitely going to hurt this one. And then the licensing side of their business also, if there's a slowdown in smartphone sales.
That said, what George said, it's getting to a pretty interesting point from a technical level here.
Right, yeah, for sure. All right, thanks to George Tsilis for joining us, breaking down.
All right, guys.
Yep, thanks, George.